Welcome to Living Beyond the Invisible, a walk with Heather. I'm Heather Perrin, and this is the space where we will pull back the curtain on life with invisible disabilities. Each week, we'll explore the realities of chronic illness, the challenges that often go unseen, and the strength it takes to keep moving forward. Whether you're living with an invisible disability yourself, supporting someone who is, or just wanting to understand more, you're in the right place. Let's take this walk together. Hey guys, welcome back to Living Beyond the Invisible, a walk with Heather. I'm Heather, and today we're going to talk about something that a lot of us living with invisible disabilities will absolutely understand well. We're going to chat about why we stop sharing our truth, why we tend to keep things inside and just say we're fine or we're okay when asked how we're doing, when we are neither fine or okay. And just a little side note, I'm sure you guys know this by now, but my brain is foggy, my ADHD is flaring, my pain levels are high, it is raining. I'm not feeling great today, so if I stumble over my words, if I make a mistake, just roll with it because that is part of living with invisible disability. So we stop doing these things. We stop sharing our story. We start saying, we're fine, we're okay. I do it myself all the time. And it's not because we're ashamed or because we're somehow lying about something. No, actually, it's because somewhere along the way, many of us have learned that telling the truth about our lives can be exhausting and sometimes even a little bit traumatic. So if you ever wondered why being honest about your health sometimes feels harder than the illness itself, I really hope today's conversation helps you understand that you are absolutely not alone. There's an entire community of us out there just waiting to welcome you with open arms. See, I already messed up. So one of the most difficult realities of living with an invisible disability really isn't the diagnoses themselves. It's that your experience often exists in a space between what you know and what other people believe. You know what your body feels like. You know how much energy it takes to get through a day. You know the symptoms that wake you up at night, the medications you take, the doctor's appointments you've attended, the fears you've carried, and the limitations you've had to accept. But here's the thing. Other people only see little snippets of that. They only see these little snapshots of your world and what it's like to be you. They don't feel the pain. They don't see the utter exhaustion. No, instead they see you going to the grocery store because you still got to eat. They see you on social media smiling because you slapped that mask on and smiled for the camera because that's what was expected of you. They see the 1 hour that you managed to show up to something. What they don't see is the recovery that 1 hour caused you to have to go through for potentially days. They don't see the flare-ups. They don't see the pain medication. They don't see the tears. They don't see the fatigue that follows all of that. They don't get that showing up means you will pay for it later. At least I know I do. And I know many others that do as well. Because of that, many people with invisible disabilities find themselves repeatedly explaining things that should not require explanation. And after enough experiences where they aren't believed, understood, or supported, many of us just stop trying. Researchers who study chronic illness have found that repeated experiences of invalidation can significantly affect emotional well-being, self-esteem, and social behavior. Human beings are wired for connection. We are wired to seek understanding and belonging. When we repeatedly share something deeply personal and receive skepticism, dismissal, judgment, or minimization, In return, the brain learns something important. It learns that vulnerability may not be safe, most likely isn't safe. This learning process is rooted in basic neuroscience. The brain is constantly scanning for threats and rewards. Positive social interactions activate reward pathways and strengthen feelings of safety and connection. Negative social experiences activate areas of the brain associated with emotional pain and threat detection. What's fascinating is that the brain imaging studies have shown that social rejection activates some of the same neural pathways involved in physical pain. So let's think about that for just a second. The brain processes social exclusion and invalidation in ways that overlap with how it processes physical suffering. That means that when someone repeatedly dismisses your experience, your nervous system often responds as though you have encountered a genuine threat. Over time, this can change behavior. People become more guarded, more cautious, more selective about what they share. And eventually, some people stop sharing altogether. This also tends to lead to a fight or flight response and keeps most of us in that trauma loop where we're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. We can never be calm or relaxed. We always are anxious and waiting for someone else to doubt our truth. Many people living with chronic illness or invisible illness can remember exactly when all of this started. Maybe it was a friend who said, "But you don't look sick." You guys know that's my favorite term ever. Hear the sarcasm in that? Maybe it was the family member who suggested it was all just stress. Yep, heard that too. Maybe it was the coworker who implied you were exaggerating. Been there, done that. Maybe it was the doctor who dismissed your symptoms for years as well. Or maybe it wasn't one major event at all. Maybe it was hundreds of small moments that accumulated over time. Little comments, little doubts, little dismissals. Tiny cuts that eventually became emotional scars. And here's the thing, some of us have lived with it our entire lives. We talked about age bias a couple weeks ago. And actually last week. I don't know why I said a couple weeks ago. That was just last week. Sorry. Brain forgot where we were at. But anyway, I have heard since I was a little girl, you're too young to be sick. You're too young to have all of those heart problems. Oh, you're too young for that. I wanted to smack them, even at 5. Because even at 5, I knew you shouldn't doubt someone when they said they had a health issue. How is it that a 5-year-old knows that and can defend herself, but a grown adult can't have the decency to not have a smartass response? Pardon my language. You know, I don't usually cuss, but seriously. Um, anyway, sorry, before I get too off track. Let's get back to my script because I'm getting off script. I get fired up a little bit over this because there are so many people who live with invisible illnesses that you cannot see. And the thing about that is, so many people doubt them simply because there are also a lot of people, including some influencers, and I put that in quotation marks, who like to lie about having multiple invisible illnesses because they can't be seen. So that makes it harder for the rest of us. Just something I wanted to put out there. Anyway, one of the most painful things about invisible illness is that people often expect proof. Not intentionally, perhaps, but that's often how it really feels. People want evidence. They want a cast, a scar they can see, a wheelchair, a visible sign that confirms what you're saying. And when that evidence doesn't exist, many people begin treating the illness as questionable. Now, I'm going to pause here to tell a story that was not in the script. I know, I just went off script, but stick with me here, okay? Um, I do have scars from my open heart surgery, my closed heart surgery, from my heart issues, also from my breast cancer, but that's beside the point. My chest is full of scars. However, unless I have a lower shirt on, which I rarely wear, you cannot see my scar at all. So on the outside, I look 100% fine. I also have fibromyalgia and osteoarthritis and osteopenia and um, ADHD and, all the things. But people can't see those things. And so then I often get asked, well, are you really that sick? Or I get dirty looks from people if I have to use my handicap placard because it's a bad day. Look, I can still drive when I don't feel good. I just may not be able to walk all the way across the parking lot. Um, but that's it is what it is. That is something we have to live with, and I know I'm not alone um, in that area. Now, the problem with all of that is that some of the most disabling conditions in the world are largely invisible. You have autoimmune diseases, neurological disorders, chronic pain conditions, migraine disease, mental health disorder, heart conditions, chronic fatigue syndromes, and the list goes on and on and on and on. Many of these conditions can profoundly impact quality of life while leaving few visible clues. As a result, people living with these conditions often become trapped in a strange contradiction. If they talk about their symptoms, they're accused of focusing too much on the illness. If they don't talk about their symptoms, people assume that they're completely healthy. It can feel like there is no winning, and most of the time, there's not. Eventually, most people decide that silence just feels easier. And I've been to that point. And then I decided that no, I was not going to sit back and be silent. I was going to advocate for those who may not be able to advocate for themselves. I was going to fight against those who want to take our pain, our suffering, and use it for content, use it for sympathy, and use it to gain something when they don't have those actual disabilities. I want to do good with all of this. And but the people who do go silent, it's not because silence feels good, but because it just feels safer. It feels easier to just be silent because then you feel safe. You're not being judged, you're not being ridiculed, you're not being bullied for your health issues. And there is another reason people stop sharing their truth that you might not think about, and that's simply just because they're tired. And I don't just mean physically tired, like go take a nap and you'll feel better. I'm talking emotionally and mentally tired as well. Explaining chronic illness and its symptoms, educating others, correcting misconceptions, defending your reality all require a ton of energy. So when someone is already managing pain, fatigue, appointments, medications, insurance battles, and daily responsibilities, there often isn't much energy left for advocacy. Sometimes people stop sharing simply because they're exhausted. There is also the issue of compassion fatigue within relationships. Many people living with chronic illness worry about becoming a burden. Yep, that would be me. I still have these fears. Even with my advocacy and awareness, I talk about it all day long, but I still worry that I'm a burden to my family, especially Andrew and my mom, because they're the two that help me the most. They worry that they are talking about their health too much. I worry about that as well. They worry about being perceived as negative. I have that worry as well. They worry about overwhelming friends and family. We just talked about that. And over time, they begin editing themselves. They stop sharing their pain, symptoms, and struggles. They become experts at carrying those difficult things quietly and all alone. And trust me, it is lonely. And here's the thing about me. There's a certain influencer, and I'm not going to call her by name because I don't want the drama, but if you know, you know, and if you follow my page, you can probably figure it out. If you follow Sisters of Snark, the comeback tour, you definitely can figure it out. Yeah, I'm putting that out there. But because of her, there are times that I'm nervous about sharing something about my own personal journey, or putting things out there, because she lies so much about having certain invisible illnesses when it's very easy to tell she absolutely does not. And family members of hers who are against her have actually said, no, she does not have any of that. But yet she lies about it, and that makes it harder for all of us that are legitimately in the invisible disability community. So it's rough. And the irony is that the people who worry most about being a burden, like myself, probably like you if you are living with an invisible disability, are often the people carrying the heaviest burdens. And I really do feel that's true, which is why I wrote that, but not the point. Research in health psychology has shown that chronic illness frequently leads to social withdrawal. Not because people want isolation, but because managing illness already consumes so much the physical and emotional energy. Add invalidation to that equation, and withdrawal becomes even more likely. The person who used to share openly becomes guarded. The person who once asked for support begins saying, don't worry about it. The person who desperately needs understanding begins convincing everyone they're okay. Not because they actually are okay, but because they've learned not to expect understanding. One of the reasons I've kind of gotten quiet over the last several months is because of those reasons. I didn't want to be too much. I didn't want to be judged or someone think I'm lying. Every one of my diagnoses that I have, I can 100% confirm and prove that I have them. I shouldn't have to, but I can, except for PTSD and autism. Because while I have an unofficial diagnosis for both of those, I've never actually gone through the testing because our insurance doesn't cover it, and it is just too expensive to do so. So one of the saddest consequences of this silence is that it creates the illusion that fewer people are struggling than they actually are. When people stop sharing their truth, others begin believing they're alone in theirs, which is why I come back and started sharing my story again. Someone living with chronic pain right now thinks that nobody else understands. Someone struggling with disability thinks they're the only one. Someone facing mental health challenges believes everyone else is handling life just fine. But often the truth is that many people are just struggling quietly. They're simply no longer talking about it. This is one reason communities centered around chronic illness and disability can feel absolutely so powerful. For the first time, many people encounter others who understand without explanation. They don't have to prove anything. They don't have to justify symptoms. They don't have to defend accommodations. And they don't have to convince anyone else that their experience is very real. There is incredible healing in being believed. Trust me, I know from experience. And studies back me up because they consistently show that social support is associated with better mental health outcomes, lower stress levels, improved coping abilities, and increased resilience among people living with invisible illnesses. Feeling understood, feeling seen, feeling believed all matter. Human beings heal in community. And that's not always physical either. That can be emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, all the ways. And my friends, that healing begins with truth. Unfortunately, telling the truth often requires courage. It often requires being honest and brave. But being honest carries risks. When you tell the truth about your disability, some people may misunderstand. When you tell the truth about your limitations, you're going to get judged. When you tell the truth about your symptoms, a lot of people may become uncomfortable. And yet authenticity, cannot talk today, remains one of the most powerful forms of freedom available to us. Psychologists often talk about the emotional cost of masking. Masking, we've talked about it before, but it occurs when people suppress parts of themselves in order to fit expectations or avoid negative reactions. While the term is often associated with neurodivergence, the concept applies broadly to chronic illness as well. Many people with invisible disabilities mask constantly. They smile through the pain, they hide fatigue, they minimize symptoms, they pretend they have more energy than they actually do. They act healthier than they feel. The problem is that masking requires effort. The brain must continuously monitor, adjust, and suppress reality. That effort consumes cognitive and emotional resources. Over time, chronic masking contributes to stress, burnout, anxiety, emotional exhaustion, and reduced psychological well-being. Simply put, pretending is expensive, and eventually many people realize the cost is just way too high. That doesn't mean sharing. Hold on, my brain just froze. Now, sharing doesn't mean you have to share everything with everyone, because boundaries do matter. And not everybody earns access to your story or deserves your vulnerability. But there is a difference between choosing privacy and living in silence. Privacy is empowering, silence born from fear is often painful. One comes from choice, the other comes from self protection. Learning the difference can be life changing. As people of faith, I think this conversation matters deeply because Scripture repeatedly emphasizes truth. Not performative perfection, not appearances, but just the simple truth. One of the things I love about Jesus is that he never demanded that people hide their struggles before approaching him. People came with blindness, pain, disease, grief, fear, doubt, weakness, and they came honestly. There was no requirement to pretend. There was no expectation that suffering should remain hidden. There was simply an invitation to come as they were. I think many people living with chronic illness need to hear that today. You do not have to pretend to be okay all the time. You don't have to perform strength every moment of every day. You don't have to hide your struggles to make others comfortable. Your pain is not less real because it makes someone uncomfortable. Your limitations are not less valid because they cannot be seen. Your story is not less important because others do not fully understand it. The truth is that sharing our truth is an act of courage, not because it guarantees acceptance, but because it allows us to live authentically. And authenticity is where connections begin. If you are listening today and you've stopped sharing your truth, I want you to know that I understand why. Maybe you've been hurt. Maybe you've been dismissed. Maybe you've been judged. Or maybe you've spent years feeling misunderstood. Your silence makes sense. But I also hope you remember that there are people who will believe you. There are people who will listen. There are people who will understand. And there are communities where your truth does not need to be defended. Because living beyond the invisible was never meant to mean living unseen. Your experiences, your voice, your story matters. And even if the world does not always understand what you carry, that does not make your burden any less real. Thank you for joining me today on Living Beyond the Invisible, A Walk with Heather. If this episode resonated with you, remember, you're not alone on this journey. You can connect with me on Facebook and TikTok, where I share more encouragement, advocacy, and behind-the-scenes glimpses of life with invisible disabilities. And if you'd like to support the podcast and gain access to exclusive content, you can also join me on Patreon. All of those links are in the show notes. Until next time, take gentle care of yourself, and I'll see you next week.